Well, good evening if you're in New York, and good morning if you're in Australia. The purpose of the show is to try and get a gang together and talk about home economics. That's when the married couple is viewed as the base economic thing. The married couple is the smallest economic unit, and that's how you get a detached house, and that's how you get people out of poverty. There's poverty, and the opposite of poverty is getting a detached house from the 1950s. There's a living room to live in, and a bedroom, and a dining room to eat in, a kitchen to support the dining room, a garage to support the big American car that gets you to every place. And that's what gets people out of poverty. It's the opposite of housing projects and tenements, apartments. And there's so many gals who are just in dire straits now because they threw all that out. They threw it out in the 1950s here in the United States, the rest of the country. The idea is to get you to go back to that. There's so many gals, especially on the computer, and they're just in despair. They're way past tears. What am I going to do? I can't make end meet. I got a 3-year-old to take care of. There's no way I'm going to afford insurance and that sort of thing. And you aren't going to. It's not going to work out. As they did that back in the 70s, and it's one of the very important things you have to talk about. So the idea is to get a gang together, get you to call in and say, enough is enough. If I went back to the 1950s, if I was a normal, well-adjusted person, then, which is not a natural thing, if I was a normal, well-adjusted person, if I was a good mother, a good wife, and then a good mother, and I was a good husband, and then a good father, and it spills into home economics, what's the budget? What do you need for groceries and clothing and shoes on the kid? And there's something very important. If you're going to do the producing side of things, then you're going to do the consuming side of things. Same gal does the producing, does the consuming. And the working life of an American housewife is different from the guy. And so once her child gets into school, the children get into school, that's when she has free time. It's up to her, and that's her time to go recreate, go play tennis at the country club. And so you would have a professional person, and you would have a professional home economist and an amateur tennis players. And that was very much thrown out in the 70s. And from the guy's point of view, if you had a job that produced things like a plumber, you had to start working more and more hours, and then you and your wife had to start working, and then you were pushed into a class of peasantry. And so the question is, if you have a job as a plumber or a forklift operator or a job that produces something, how many hours would you have to work to come up with that budget? If you have those two things, you know where we are now. You can do something about it. You know where to go. And so there's the idea of being normal and well-adjusted. Both the Catholic and the atheist define mental illness as the normal taken into the abnormal, from a cold to the flu to pneumonia. The Catholics, the monks, and the popes go backwards, from pneumonia back to a cold, to the flu and a cold. The normal is normal, but not good enough. If you're young, it's easy to see with sex. If you're a young man, just sit in a chair, fantasize about the gals until he becomes sexually aroused. He opens his eyes, he looks around the room, he closes his eyes and fantasizes again, only this time he's fantasizing about actually getting the gal pregnant. And there you go. Now he'll understand what a sense of original sin is with a snap of a finger. To place those very powerful acts that have to do with sex and associate them with getting the gal pregnant is just not a natural thing at all. And if you add fear to that, your attitude changes when you're afraid. And the idea that you can't stand up, the idea that your environment changes your attitude changes your environment, and the fact that you have to be taught that, it leads to a very famous philosophical phrase: what takes away your free will? Fear, sex, ignorance, and violence. And there's another part to that. You have to have there's some missing thing, some circle up there that doesn't have anything in it, or a computer cloud of electrons that form hourglass, and the upper part of that hourglass is missing. And that's where religion comes in. That's what makes Catholicism. That's what religion is. When the Catholics say have faith, that's what they're talking about. They go up there and hold that faith that Christ rose on the third day, and then you head out again. You're normal and well adjusted. And so being normal and well adjusted is a Catholic shtick. A normal supply and demand curve is a Catholic shtick. The idea of having a huge middle class is a result of that. You take the leadership style of washing the feet of the apostles. You make money by putting people in their own business, and it turns into a normal supply and demand curve. That's where you get God and country from. Just to daydream a little more, just so it said, picture a 1950s American house, and then go off to the side, start at the bottom, started with farming and mining, then above that, manufacturing, then above that, wholesale, retail, and repair, and above that, retirement, education, and recreation. The lawyers and doctors and lawyers form a kind of lattice that holds it all together. It's a Catholic priest that causes it to come into being to begin with. But it is a religious thing. Certain times in society, in the United States, it was around the 1970s. In the 1950s, the communists said they would overthrow the United States in the 1970s. And in the 1970s, there was a huge upheaval of our society. They went from home economics to individual rights. And they had reached a fork in the road. And it was their choice to either get onto a maintenance level to make money by putting somebody else in their own business, or to cash in on it all, to get into real estate and to get into rental property and move in the foothills and become a peasant and property class society. They chose the latter. Excuse me. They threw out God, that disposition that the Catholic priest has, that real presence of Christ in the Eucharist, that infusion. They had the sexual revolution. In other words, they adopted malice, that emotional attitude, and they threw out decency as a formal argument. They threw out the idea of making money by making somebody else better off, and institutionalized the idea of making money even though it cost other people to be plunged into poverty, to work more hours. And they were a celebration of malice. Weren't guilty of anything simply because they had no guilt in them. And go back and look. Everything from the Billie Jean King tennis tour to the women's liberation movement, to the Black Civil Rights movement, to the Chicano movement, to the whatever you call the John Lennon and the Beatles, all had the same theme. If you take a step back and have a sense of category and put people who hustle, con, manipulate, and intimidate people on one side, and that's what happened. That's the civil rights movement of the 70s. It becomes a kind of ladder if you turn that ladder around, and you, even though it's not a natural thing, if you arrange things so that the priest who takes a vow of poverty maximizes profits, the gal who changes the dirty diapers gets the sex, and you do it because Christ rose on the third day, and the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist, if you arrange the parameters of competition so that there'll be a large middle class, there'll be a large middle class. If you breed a breed of normal, well-adjusted people, there'll be a breed of normal, well-adjusted people. It goes against nature. You have to work at it, which means you have to have people in charge who maximize benefits and maximize utilities by heading in that direction. And so it sort of drifts away from the reality. The reality of it is that gal I saw on the computer, and she's in her closet and she's beside herself. She's broadcasting from in her closet because she doesn't want to wake her child up, and because they share the same room. And she just doesn't know what she's going to do. She can't possibly work enough hours to make ends meet. That's done very intentionally and very deliberately. And it was done maliciously. They don't care if that person starves. And that's the women's liberation movement. if you're a gal, and that's the civil rights movement. If you're a guy of whatever color, and that's the intellectual movement of the Ivy Leaguers. They don't care whether that you starve or not. I know a gal who's having problems and she needs medical attention, and she, her copays are too high for her. And what's she going to do? And that's a good example of the difference. Take a moment and talk about healthcare. Should they have nationalized medicine or not? And the answer is nonsense. You just don't believe a word they say, throw it all out the window and come over here. First, you go back and straighten out the government and go back to home economics and go back to God and country. If you want to be a citizen in the United States, you have to buy into our culture. Race relegated to an endearing quality of your parents. These thoughts that have to do with fear, sex, ignorance, and violence are thoughts that you have to straighten yourself up emotionally. You have to will the good of another person. And if you choose to raise a family, then you can be a good husband and a good father. And excuse me, you take it from there. Once you have home economics and you're a public administrator, all this stuff just wouldn't happen. All you do is find the family doctor, which is the Catholic family doctor, that helps you, that looks after you, whether he likes you or not. He maximizes benefits and maximizes utilities by making you better off. And you just put a Cadillac in his driveway. That's all you have to worry about. All these other things, such as whether or not you should go through the government or you should go through the private sector, or you should go through a company that issues stock, which would be called a quasi-public or quasi-private. Those are all incidentals raised to absolutes. They're incidentals. They come in second place. If one works better than the other, and that's all you all you care about. And so in a normal common sense fashion, the idea of saying, I'm paying for health insurance, but I still can't go to see a doctor, wouldn't enter into it at all. It would all fit. It just so happens that you would make enough money if you're a guy to pay the gas and electric bill, to support a wife and 2.2 children. Money is just a piece of paper, so you can deliberately arrange things that way. They threw that out. We're not in that world anymore. Excuse me. So it's up to you. This part of it has to come from you. You have to hear this, and you have to say enough is enough, and chat in and start talking. This is where I am. This is how much money I make. This is how many hours I would have to work if I came across for enough money to support a wife and children and pay a mortgage. Just so I said, you don't pay rent around here. We're in the United States, and you're not supposed. You don't pay rent to anybody. You don't rent property to other people. You don't rent property from other people. And with the exception of guys like Donald Trump, who are inside. You're inside this world, and you're trying to get out of it. Donald Trump's claim to fame is standing up to a bum's rush, and he's done an awfully good job of it. You got to help out a little too. We'll tell him to keep his money in the bank. We owe him about $1 billion, and then we'll come over here and we'll keep working. The gal has to come up with about $1,600 around here just to come up with an apartment that's suitable for a 3-year-old, her and a 3-year-old to live in. You can't do that. And here you don't do that. We're a bunch of Yanks. You don't rent property that way. And you're a gal. You have to have a family budget. That's considered a profession. And since the 10-year-old, the 3-year-old can't pay you, hubby's got to come across with a paycheck. And you have to be a normal, well-adjusted person. And it goes on from there. How many hours does our particular gal have to work in order to come up with about $900 around here for daycare to watch someone else raise her child? Well, you figure it out. This is ridiculous. If you want to know something, that's the women's liberation movement. People who had gone to war to get women and teenagers and old people out of the workplace, and the women's liberation movement fought like mad to put you back in. The hustle, the bum's rush there, was that they were never in the workplace. all the leaders of the feminist movement cashed in on everything. This is what they're called. They're called the consumption society. And they weren't in the workplace at all. They did just the opposite. And so if you see the leaders of the civil rights movement and the women's liberation movement, like Billie Jean King and Nancy Pelosi and Maxine Waters and those gals, they literally did nothing more than cash in on everything. One of our anecdotes and one of our, we have about 3 dozen or so anecdotes to explain this position. And one of them is showing Jane Fonda, who is passionate about bringing communism to the United States and going to the Vietnam War, standing up for the North Vietnamese. And what did she do? She's living in a bespoke house on Malibu that costs tens of millions of dollars in a place that nobody wanted anybody to build houses in. And she caused what now amounts to a 5-mile skid row in Los Angeles and abandoned neighborhoods in Detroit. To get things out, one of the things goes like this. Picture the 1970s and picture them cashing in on it all. And at the time, hubby, hubby still made the family income. He paid the bills. He paid the electric bill. And so that when the gal worked, put that in quotes, she only, her income was recreational income. And with that extra income and their change in attitude, they became vicious. What did they do? They went out, instead of buying a house, they would buy, say, a duplex. And they would rent the duplex out to somebody else and let that other person pay their mortgage. Just like the letter V right there. That forced people in this huge middle class in the United States that were at the bottom of that huge middle class, where they could afford to get into a blue-collar neighborhood. Now they can't, and now they have to rent. And that was the beginnings of a peasant and property class society. It goes just like this, and you can just see it. And now we have no factories, no abandoned neighborhoods, abandoned cities with piles of trash everywhere. And that's the result of giving those guys, giving Harry the hippie and Al the Afro and Donna the feminist a blank check and unlimited resources. And there was nothing you could do about it because you couldn't shove religion down their throats. To get something else out that is something to know, courts came out at the time and they said there should be no religion in government. And in doing so, they threw out those 3 things that make up God and country. They had the sexual revolution. They adopted malice, straightening up your emotions, willing the good of another person, and doing it because Christ rose on the 3rd day. No one said they could. They just came out and did it anyway. The bum's rush there is that they adopted the stereotypical, straight out of the textbook definition of a satanic church. So they did have religion. And what they institutionalized is hustling, knowing how to manipulate and intimidate people. And that's the classical definition of what evil is. Evil is the shop manual version of evil. People will hustle. They don't lie. They don't tell the truth. Take a look, and the person who very intentionally knows all these debating tactics and knows how to manipulate people. He doesn't lie. He just doesn't tell the truth. And he knows all these highbrow Ivy League debating tactics, put that in quotes. He does the same thing as the hustler who's down by the pool hall, and he doesn't lie. He doesn't tell the truth. And they're the same tactics. And they're the same tactics as somebody who takes the normal into the abnormal. Mental illness. The guy who's a psychopath, the guy who's a nuts, the guy who gets very scared of something over there and he starts to attack you, and then he feels like he's a real tough guy because he's too scared to attack the bad guy, so he starts attacking you. Same tactics. And so there's, in a very basic way, only those 3 worlds. There's the chimpanzee side of us, which goes from the normal to the abnormal. And then there's the either the intellectual or the evil, the class of intelligentsia, or the class of bad guys, depending on who's doing the talking. And the Catholic is the other intellectual position. The Catholic is what I think of when I think of the United States being a normal, well-adjusted society. We weren't officially Catholic, but we were officially a bunch of Yanks. And they threw out being a Yank because they threw and justified their actions by saying not being Catholic. And it walked down that road. Once you do that, once you come over here, everything starts to become clear. You can see what needs to be done. And before we end up rioting in the streets, it'd be a good idea. What's wrong? They threw out God and country. What do you do about it? Well, you go to the Supreme Court, and I'm sure they'll change their ways. I'm sure they'll get a step down and get some people in there who are Catholic judges. The stereotypical, what I think of when I think of Perry Mason, the poor slob of a character that defends the poor and the oppressed. And I guess at that level, there's a name for them. They're called canon law lawyers. And there's that infusion. And then there's the grand deduction. You walk down the steps and walk into society. Society is made up of our citizenry and our culture. There's everybody here, then there's our culture, and they threw our culture out. And then it becomes the summation of family units and the single guys and gals and how many farms and mines there are. And now a guy like Donald Trump can go to work. You start building things. And that's what you do. It's actually a 4-stage process. But right now, we've got to find gals who will speak up and say, this is enough. This is what I need. This is what I have. Give me the credit card. This is what I need in the credit card. And I do all the consuming. There's the gal in the 1950s did the overwhelming majority of consuming, and the guy did the overwhelming majority of producing. If you define producing as going out and working at the furniture factory, that's not quite the way it should be said, but that's just to make a point. And there is an infusion there. I mean, the guy did some consuming too, and the gal, excuse me, but we're splitting them up enough so we could see it. And you could see the role of a gal. She would be the common housewife, and then when the kids are in school, she could start to recreate and maybe volunteer at the hospital someplace. And when she gets a little older, she gets to go to the city planning department, and she gets to say how the city's planned. If you notice, you have to be careful. Donald Trump is an absolute hero, but the MAGA guys are making a mistake. He stood up to a bum's rush. Now, what do you fight for? And without having any intentions of trying to split the gang up or anything like that, they're making a big mistake. All they're doing is going from the Democrats back to the Republicans. And that's what Ronald Reagan did in 1980, and it didn't work. It's not something that Donald Trump can do. It's not something that the head of the FBI, Patel, can do. It has to come from the citizenry on up. All they've done, all these very woke gals that do nothing but they don't say anything unless it makes them better off. And if you starve, well, they don't care. Unless they can debt finance, they couldn't care less. And you have to watch the hustling there, the bums rush. And that said, all they've done is go back to the conservative side. A bunch of my daddy was a female fighter pilot and female judges, and they're just the same thing, just a different radio station. What's still thrown out is Melania Trump, and just what we need, and she's still out of the picture. And the professor of home economics at Iowa School of Home Economics. So a vintage, you can go on the computer, a vintage Uh, I put in Vintage Iowa School of Home Economics, about a 20-minute sales pitch, a movie, and you'll get a good idea what the good guys are. And the Catholic nun, they still throw these people out. It was the Catholic nuns, the nuns of Carondelet that came into Tucson. They built the hospital system. They were absolutely heroic. Most of the schools, and they're still out of the picture. And so, excuse me. The first stage is to gather a gang together and to try and come up with a lesson plan. You have to teach people a sense of original sin, and teach people how to stand up to a bum's rush. You do know how to stand up to the routine of a pimp. This is a routine of a pimp. 3 stages. Excuse me. First, he isolates the gal, say the 15-year-old gal, and she's usually down in some fashion. She's a single parent, runaway or something. And she isolates him from the gang, and then he keeps her from physically moving in one direction or another. So from her point of view, she's trying to walk, and he cuts her off. That's stage 1. He is out there. Second stage, he touches her in some fashion. He shakes her hand, as an example, but he doesn't let go. And she tries to pull away a little bit, and he's not letting go. And so he's gone from out there to right here. And then the third stage, which is the important one, he starts saying something like this. You know, I have a temper, and I just don't know what I do when I have a temper. And then he says something like this, right? And he jumps at her, you right? And at that moment, she has an instantaneous decision to make. She tells herself, this guy's telling me I better be afraid of him or I'm going to die. This is a very real situation. I better go along with it because I can't beat him up, but I can't act, so I better become. And if her attitude changes, that's it. He's got her. From out there to out here to in here. The only way she's going to get out of that, if there is some outside imposed act that will help her, that will kick her out of it. A Catholic confession is the classic example of that. That's how a pimp recruits a prostitute. He has an attitude. You try it. Sit in a chair, close your eyes, fantasize about the gals or guys until you become sexually aroused. Separate the act of sex from the act of getting the gal pregnant, and just act a little bit and go through the motions. Do the other things that go with it. Find one thing and attack it. Hey, man, you're a decent human being. Give me $20. Hey, you only meant it if you could get away with it. If you could get away with it, you were just joking. You have to turn your head from side to side, make karate chops with your hands when you do that. Why, you're just not a decent human being if you don't let me be in charge. You getting the idea? There's a handful of them. They do it at the routine of a pimp. They do it at the level of communists. You can see Putin and the Chinese communists, and you can see these university professors. They're full of it. You can turn on Congress, and you'll be amazed. Excuse me. You'll be amazed on how many of those guys do nothing but hustle. They have a handful of cheap debating tactics. Nancy Pelosi is terrific at that. Some of those gals I was just listening to are very much that way. They just hustle, and they fashion themselves a tough guy. And there's an emotion associated with that. And it does change the organization. An organization's patterned after the guy who runs it. And people starve in the streets because of it. You can't see university kids when they see them interviewing on YouTube. You realize they don't even know what they're talking about. And they're college students. They haven't been educated. It's not their fault. Well, I hope someone hears this. I'm going to be on the air a little later tomorrow morning, usually to 10 o'clock, but it's going to be about 11:30. Pearl Harbor Day, our dad was in that battle, so I go to ceremonies tomorrow morning. So there. And so at 11:30, I hope someone hears this. I hope someone calls in and starts or passes a word. If you're a gal, you're just going to have to uh, bite the bullet and be bossy and say, okay, that's enough of all this. You place sex within the idea of getting pregnant. If you're going to raise a family, you got to get trained to. You have to straighten yourself up, get educated, and get trained. And if you're going to do that, you can't go out and work. You can't be the doctor or lawyer. And so you have to have an income. What's the income? You always want to sneak something in. There are female doctors. You wonder why the the healthcare system just skyrocketed, why nobody can afford to go see a doctor. Female doctors did that. They could have worked, they had no business working and then starting a family. They could have been a Catholic nun, but they didn't. And they had this, I'm not today, but when they first started, they had this very nasty, vicious attitude. They had no business being a doctor. Then they had to have the same income as their husbands. Excuse me. Then they had to take time off to have a child. And those two incomes together sent 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 healthcare through the roof. They didn't have to. They could have said, "I'll work as a doctor and I'll be a nun," or "I'll work as a doctor and my husband will only get 50% of the pay and I'll get the other 50%," or a dozen different ways. But they didn't, and they had an attitude that went along with it. And that attitude uh, had no love in it, no sense of guilt in him, no sense of empathy. You're right back to being Catholic. You have to have this imposed attitude, and you have to hold that attitude as the very basic thing. Well, I shall see you tomorrow at about, uh, what did I say? Oh, about 11 o'clock. Oh, excuse me, about 11:30, and I hope to see you there.